The House That Listens. Chapter 1. The Road That Forgot Its Travelers. The road had not been traveled in years. Once it had led from the village to the hills, where a quarry worked, and carts rattled day and night. But the quarry closed, the carts rotted, and the road itself seemed to shrink, as though the earth wished to swallow it back. No one told stories about the road anymore, not out loud anyway. But children dared one another to walk its first few steps at dusk. They always turned back before the shadows thickened, all except one boy, Elias Harrow, who swore he'd seen a house at the end. "They keep it boarded up," Elias whispered once by the fire, when he was old enough to drink but young enough to boast. "But I heard someone inside, not moving, just listening." The older men at the tavern only shook their heads. One muttered, "Best leave it, best leave them." But when Elias asked, "Who's them?" no one answered. They looked down at their mugs instead. Years later, Elias grew restless. The village had nothing for him. The quarry gone, the fields poor, and the road cold to him still. On the morning he left, he told his mother, "Don't wait for me. I'll only be gone a night." She wept into her apron, though she couldn't say why. Perhaps because she remembered when she herself was a girl, and her grandmother had whispered warnings of the house that learned what it heard. The road narrowed quickly as Elias walked. Brambles scratched his sleeves, nettles brushed against his boots. Birds grew quiet the deeper he went. At last the canopy of trees closed overhead, and the path became a tunnel of shadow. "Not so far," he told himself. His voice came back softer than he'd spoken it, as though the trees themselves had repeated him. Then, after what felt longer than an hour, the road opened, and there it stood. The house was smaller than he expected. A roof stooped low, windows nailed shut, wood darkened with rain and rot. Yet it was not ruined. The door stood straight, the chimney whole. Smoke would not have surprised him. For a long while Elias only watched. The air was still enough to hear the tick of his own heartbeat. Finally he laughed under his breath. "Just a house," he muttered. "Only an old house." But when he said it, a voice, faint, ragged, muffled, murmured back, "Old house." Elias froze. The sound had come from the boards themselves, as though the walls had answered. He waited. Nothing followed. The air remained calm, thick, heavy. He forced himself to step closer, boot crunching on gravel. "Is someone inside?" he called louder. For a moment, silence. Then, again, softer than before, the house replied, "Inside." His throat dried, but he pressed forward. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to look around." And the house sighed back, almost tenderly, "Look around." Elias's hand trembled on the rusted door handle. He pushed it, half expecting it to resist, but the door opened inward, slow, as though it had been waiting for him. The air inside was colder than the woods, heavy with damp and dust. Shadows crowded the hallway, but the boards beneath his boots held firm. Then, as the door closed softly behind him, he heard it, the faintest rustle, like someone shifting in bed upstairs. He drew a breath. "Hello?" he asked, and the house answered with his own breath, his own voice, perfectly repeated back to him. Chapter 2. The First Night. The door settled shut behind Elias with a click that sounded far too deliberate for an abandoned house. He stood in the entryway, the dust heavy in his lungs, his eyes adjusting to the dim light that trickled through the cracks in the boards. The hallway stretched ahead, narrow, walls the color of old parchment, a staircase rising steeply on the left, paint peeled in long, curling strips. A single picture frame hung crooked, its glass cracked across the face of a family photograph too faded to make out. Elias lingered beneath it, squinting. A woman, a man, a child, perhaps? Their features blurred, melted into sepia shadows. He whispered, "Who were you?" The whisper did not belong to him alone. It traveled down the hall, brushing against his ears as if repeated in chorus, softer with each echo. "Who were you? Who were you?" He shivered. "So it's true," he murmured. "The house listens." The reply came instantly, drawn out, low. "Listens." For a moment, Elias considered fleeing back into the woods. But he had left the village behind for good reason. He had nothing there, no future but to wither like the crops. Here, though unsettling, was something different, something alive. He stepped deeper into the hall. His boots left prints in the dust, though faint smudges suggested others had walked here not long ago. The air carried the faint scent of smoke, though the hearth was cold. Room by room he explored. A parlor, where a sofa slouched beneath a sheet yellowed with age. A kitchen, its table set with 3 plates, as if a meal had been interrupted but never cleared away. He touched one plate. It shifted beneath his fingers, leaving a clean circle where dust had refused to settle. "Someone's been here," he muttered. The house muttered back. "Been here." Night fell quickly in that part of the woods. By the time Elias opened a bedroom door upstairs, the last strip of light had faded, leaving the room lit only by moonshine leaking through a crack in the boards. He set down his pack, struck a match, and lit the stub of a candle he carried. Its flame trembled, but not from draught. The air here was still, suffocatingly so. The bed sagged beneath him as he sat. He listened. Somewhere deep in the walls, something shifted. Not rats, not wood creaking. Something slower, like a body turning beneath blankets. "Do you want me here?" he asked the darkness. For a long moment, silence. Then, gently, almost kindly, "Want me here?" It was not quite an answer, but he felt the corners of his mouth twitch in a grim smile. "All right then, I'll stay one night." He stretched out on the bed. The candle guttered lower. His breathing slowed. And then he realized he was not breathing alone. A second rhythm, faint but unmistakable, rose and fell beneath his own. Inhale when he inhaled, exhale when he exhaled, but a fraction too slow, too heavy, as if the house were trying to match him, learning the shape of his breath. His chest tightened. He turned on his side, holding himself still. The breathing continued, now a whisper against his ear, though the room was empty. And just as sleep threatened to take him, he heard it. Not his own voice this time, but another. A woman's, hushed, frayed, close enough to stir the hairs at his neck. "Don't let it dream with you." Elias's eyes snapped open. The candle had gone out. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Dark. Elias lay frozen in the bed, the sheets brittle as parchment against his skin. The woman's voice still clung to his ear. "Don't let it dream with you." He sat up too fast, heart hammering. The candle had guttered out, leaving the room bathed in moonlight that leaked through the cracks in the boards. Dust shimmered like falling snow, disturbed by no hand, no wind. "Who's there?" he demanded. His voice cracked more than he wished. Silence. Then, as though the walls themselves considered his words, the house breathed back. "Who's there?" He swallowed hard. "Not you," he whispered. "Someone else spoke." The bed creaked beneath him. A long pause followed, and then, faintly, softer than breath, "Someone else." Elias's hands clenched the sheets. His first instinct was to run, to fling the door open, to storm back down the path, never to return. But beneath his fear stirred something sharper: curiosity. He had grown up with nothing but the dull rhythm of fields, the slow grind of poverty. Now, here was something alive, something that spoke. "Fine," he muttered, standing. "If you want me to stay, then speak plainly. Show yourself." The house answered with stillness. Not silence, for silence is empty. This was listening. He lit another match and brought it to the candle. The flame sputtered back to life, throwing long shadows across the walls. That was when he noticed it. Words, faintly carved into the wood above the headboard. He leaned close, brushing away dust. "The house remembers." His skin prickled. He traced the letters with his fingertip, and the boards shuddered beneath his touch, like skin quivering under a cold hand. He staggered back, almost knocking the candle over. A floorboard groaned in the hall outside. Elias froze. Slowly, carefully, he opened the bedroom door. The corridor lay in silence, the moonlight silvering the dust. But the prints in that dust were no longer his alone. Bare feet had walked the length of the hall, fresh, damp, as though they had only just stepped from water. His voice trembled as he whispered, "Who else is here?" And then, from behind him, the same whisper answered, not the house's, not his own, but the soft, ragged voice of the woman he had heard before. "Don't let it dream with you." He spun, candle raised. The room was empty. Only the bed, the cracked window, the faint scratching of branches outside. His breath thundered in his ears. He forced himself back into the room, slammed the door shut, and leaned against it. The candle's flame shook. The boards beneath him whispered in a dozen voices at once, some his, some not. "Dream, dream with you, dream with you." He clamped his hands over his ears, but it was inside him now, the sound vibrating through his ribs, his skull. At last, desperate for silence, Elias lay down again. He shut his eyes tight. The whispers faded, not gone, but softer, sinking deeper, like roots burrowing into soil. And just before sleep claimed him, he felt the bed dip beside him, as if someone unseen had lain down, mirroring his every breath. Chapter 4. The Second Voice. Elias woke not to sunlight, but to the cold weight of a presence. His eyes opened slowly, lids heavy as if he had not slept at all. The room glowed faintly with morning gray, seeping through the cracks in the boards. Dust hung motionless in the air, caught in a silence so deep it pressed on his ears. For a moment, he thought he was alone. But then came the sound, a sigh, low and heavy, from the pillow beside him. He turned his head. The bed was empty. He sat up fast, heart thundering, and swung his feet to the floor. The boards felt damp, as though water had seeped through them overnight. He pulled his boots on quickly, trying to shake off the chill. "Enough," he said aloud, though his voice trembled. "If you want me here, you'll have to speak to me directly." The walls hummed faintly in response, wood groaning with something that might have been agreement. Elias took the candle stub in hand, lit it once more, and left the bedroom. The hallway stretched long and narrow, bare footprints leading ahead of him. He followed, every creak of the floorboards echoing twice, once from his own step, and once delayed, as if another set of feet followed half a beat behind. The footprints led him to the parlor. The sheet covering the sofa had been pulled down in the night, crumpled on the floor. On the cushions lay the impression of a body, pressed deep as if someone had sat there for hours. "Who are you?" Elias asked. The answer came not from the walls this time, but from the air itself, the faint rasp of a woman's voice carrying through the stillness. Not all of us stayed. Elias stiffened. He turned in a slow circle, candle shaking. "Where are you?" The voice drifted again, near his ear though no one stood close. "Too many dreamed too long. The house keeps their sleep." He swallowed hard, forcing himself to steady. "And you? You warned me." A pause. Then, "I woke. I walked. But I cannot leave." The words sank into him like stones into water. Elias gritted his teeth. "Then show yourself." Silence. The candle guttered low. He thought he saw movement in the corner, a pale flicker, the shape of a woman in a tattered dress. But when he turned, the corner was empty. His frustration burst out sharp. "I came here for answers, not riddles." The house responded this time, its echo louder, many-voiced. "Answers, not riddles." He staggered back. The walls seemed closer than before, the ceiling lower. Then came the woman's voice again, softer now, urgent. "You must leave before it learns your dreams. Once it dreams with you, you will not wake alone." Elias's skin prickled cold. "What does that mean?" he asked, but the voice had already faded. Silence. Only the steady breathing of the house remained, slow and patient, as though it had all the time in the world to wait for him to sleep again. Chapter 5. The Markings. By midday, Elias had nearly convinced himself he had imagined the voice. Hunger gnawed at him, so he scavenged through the kitchen. The cupboards held jars of preserves, long crystallized, bread turned stone hard, tins rusted through. But when he opened the pantry door, he stopped short. A basket sat on the shelf, lined with cloth that looked fresh, unstained by time. Inside lay a heel of bread, still soft, and a wedge of cheese that smelled sharp, but not spoiled. Elias touched the bread, pressed it between his fingers. It yielded. Not decades old, not even a day. "Someone is here," he murmured. The house breathed back in its low mimicry. "Someone is here." He ate sparingly, the taste of the food strange on his tongue, as though it belonged to another era. When he finished, he left the basket on the table. His eyes caught on something scratched into the wood beside it, faint lines, shallow grooves, carved by a knife perhaps. He leaned close. They were not words this time, but symbols, circles with slashes through them, a spiral, a shape like an eye, dozens of them, overlapping, etched again and again until the wood was pale with wear. He traced one. The boards quivered beneath his touch, as though the symbols themselves still held a charge. "Did you do this?" he asked. The whisper came instantly. "I do this." Elias stiffened. "No, not you. Them. The people before me." For a heartbeat, the house said nothing. Then, faint and strained, came the rasp of the woman's voice once more. "They carved to remember. They carved to keep themselves awake." The words chilled him. He stared at the spirals. Were they warnings, protections, or simply the desperate scrawls of those who had stayed too long? His eyes darted to the staircase. The upper floor yawned in shadow, the air heavier there. Something in him wanted to climb it, to push deeper, to see what else the house remembered. But as he set his foot on the first step, the boards beneath him whispered, not echoing, but pleading in the voices of many, men, women, children all together, "Don't go upstairs." He froze. He felt the weight of their unseen eyes pressing from the walls, from the boards, from the very air. He drew his foot back slowly, every nerve screaming with unease. "All right," he said. His voice was steadier than he felt. "Not yet." The house seemed to sigh, long and low, wood groaning like lungs releasing a breath, and in that sigh, carried faintly, was another voice, one he had not yet heard, a man's, deep and distant. You're already too late. Chapter 6. The Locked Door. The afternoon dragged on, the light dim even when the sun should have been high. The air inside the house did not change with time. It remained heavy, stale, as if the walls held their own weather. Elias wandered restlessly, candle stub clutched in his hand, though it was not yet dark. He paced the parlor, the kitchen, the narrow hallway. Every creak beneath his boots answered a half-beat later by another echoing creak. Finally, his eyes returned to the staircase. "Don't go upstairs," the voices had whispered, which meant, of course, that he had to. He climbed slowly, one step at a time, candle flame shivering. The stairs rose higher than they looked from below. He counted 20 steps, then 25, before he reached the landing. 3 doors waited at the top. 2 stood ajar, shadows spilling out. The third was shut tight, a heavy brass lock fixed across it. He tried the first door. A nursery, the furniture small and broken, a cradle overturned in the corner. The walls bore more carvings, spirals, circles, slashes. Some gouged deep, as though carved in panic. The second room was a study. A desk collapsed beneath its own weight, papers scattered across the floor, their ink faded to pale stains. But one sheet lay on the desk, sharper than the rest, fresh. He lifted it carefully. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. "Stay awake. If you dream, it will dream too." Elias's pulse quickened. He set the paper down and turned to the last door. The brass lock glinted in the candlelight. He pulled at it. It did not move. He pressed his ear against the wood. For a moment there was nothing. Then, faintly, the slow, steady sound of breathing. "Who's in there?" he asked. The house answered at once, whispering with his own voice. "Who's in there?" He shook his head. "Not you, someone else." The breathing on the other side of the door grew heavier, deeper. His own breath faltered, trying to match it. "Talk to me," Elias demanded. "I know you're there." At last a sound emerged, not words, but a low, dragging groan, as though someone had been asleep too long and was struggling to wake. The boards beneath Elias's feet trembled faintly, dust drifting down from the ceiling. The woman's voice hissed suddenly at his ear, urgent and sharp. "Do not open it." He spun, candle raised, but the hallway was empty. Only shadows lingered. He turned back to the locked door. The groan inside had subsided into silence again. Elias's hand hovered over the lock. Part of him ached to pry it open, to see what the house was hiding. Another part whispered that the house wanted him to. At last he stepped back. "Not yet," he muttered. The house groaned around him in protest, the timbers creaking like bones shifting in their graves. And faintly, from behind the locked door, came a man's voice at last, hoarse, cracked, and impossibly near. "Sleep with me." Chapter 7. The House Remembers. Elias could not shake the voice. "Sleep with me." The words lingered in his head long after he had left the locked door behind, circling, repeating, as though they had been spoken from within his own skull. He retreated to the kitchen, where daylight filtered weakly through the slats. The breadbasket remained on the table, only now the cheese was gone. In its place lay another scrap of paper. His stomach turned as he unfolded it. The handwriting was different this time, neat, deliberate. "The house does not forget. The house does not forgive. It only remembers." Elias gripped the paper hard enough to crumple it. "Remembers what?" he demanded. The answer came from the walls, layered in dozens of voices. Remembers what? He slammed his fist against the table. "Stop echoing me! Tell me what you mean!" The house fell quiet, but the silence was worse, thick, suffocating, as though it were listening harder than before. He stared at the symbols carved into the wood. Spirals, circles, eyes. His fingertip hovered over one before he pressed it firmly. The grain of the table shivered under his touch. In an instant, his vision blurred. The kitchen dissolved around him, colors bleeding into gray. He staggered, clutching the table as the house seemed to remember before his eyes. The walls brightened with lamplight. Shadows flickered. The table stood clean, dishes spread with steaming food. 3 figures sat there, a man, a woman, and a child. Their faces were indistinct, blurred like watercolors in the rain. They spoke to one another, but their voices were muffled, swallowed by the house itself. Only the rhythm of their lips moved. Elias strained to hear. At last, one word slipped through. Dream. The vision shuddered. The family froze, then turned their heads in unison toward Elias, though he knew they could not see him. Their eyes were voids. Their mouths opened wide, too wide, and the word rolled out again, in 3 voices layered together. Dream. Elias jerked back. The kitchen snapped back to dust and shadow, the candle sputtering in his hand. He didn't even flinch at the heat. He whispered, "You showed me." And the house replied, with the same layered voices, slow and deliberate. "You showed me." "No," Elias hissed. "I saw them, the family." The woman's voice drifted near his ear again, so faint he almost mistook it for his own thought. "They dreamed too long. The house remembers their sleep." His candle burned lower, wax dripping onto his fingers. He didn't even flinch at the heat. Then what's behind the locked door? The reply came not from the woman, not from the house, but from deep within the walls, where something vast and patient stirred. A man's voice, thick with drowsy hunger, murmured, "The ones who never woke."
Chapter 8. The Window That Watches. Elias did not sleep that night. He paced the upstairs hall, candle burning low, every shadow twitching at the edges of his sight. Behind the locked door, the breathing continued, slow, steady, patient. He whispered once, just once, to test it. "Are you awake?" The answer came immediately, too close, too warm. Awake. He staggered back, his heart slamming. The lock rattled faintly, as though tested from the other side. He fled down the hall before it could answer again. In the bedroom, he pushed the heavy dresser against the door. He sat on the bed, gripping the candle stub, refusing to close his eyes. The house creaked and sighed, but no other voice came to him. As the hours crawled, his gaze drifted to the boarded window. Moonlight leaked faintly between the slats. Dust swirled in the pale glow. And then he froze. Something on the other side moved. Not branches, not wind. A shape leaned close, casting a darker shadow through the cracks, as though someone stood outside the window, watching. Elias rose, inching nearer. His breath fogged faintly in the chill, blurring the glass. He pressed his ear to the boards. At first, silence. Then, a whisper, low and eager, threading through the slats. "Let me in." Elias stumbled back. "Who are you?" The whisper stretched, long and hungry. "You." His skin crawled. He grabbed a chair, wedged it beneath the latch, though the window boards looked solid enough. "Stay out," he rasped. The shadow outside twitched, then stilled. After a long pause, the whisper came again. This time not pleading, but coaxing, warm like a lullaby. "You're tired. Let me dream for you." Elias clapped his hands over his ears, but the words slid beneath his palms, winding straight into his skull. He dropped back onto the bed, shaking, forcing his eyes wide. He would not sleep. He would not. But the house had patience older than his will. Its whispers rose from the walls, from the floor, from the boards of the bed itself. Dream, dream, dream. The dresser at the door rattled faintly. The breathing from the locked room deepened as though it sensed his weakness. And just as his eyelids began to drag shut despite himself, the woman's voice hissed, sharp as a blade at his ear. "Fight it." Elias's eyes snapped open. He shot upright, drenched in sweat. The boards at the window were bare again, no shadow, no whisper. But on the inside pane of the glass, smeared in condensation, 4 words glistened, written by a hand unseen. "Let me dream too."
Chapter 9. Echoes of Sleep. Elias stayed awake all that night, though every nerve screamed for rest. The house was patient, moving around him with subtle shifts, a floorboard groaning here, a panel rattling there. Every sound was a soft, deliberate echo of his own movements. By morning, exhaustion weighed on him like a lead cloak. He wandered into the kitchen, hands shaking, and noticed the basket again. This time, it was empty. A single scrap of paper lay atop the table. "It knows your breath. It knows your pulse." Elias stared at the words. His pulse thumped violently in his ears. I won't sleep," he whispered. The house answered instantly, with a harmony of voices. "Won't sleep, won't sleep." He backed toward the hallway, his candle sputtering. Every step seemed to echo behind him. Not just the sound of his boots, but the rhythm of his own heart echoed faintly by the house. He could feel it, learning him, mapping him, marking him. The locked door upstairs called to him again, silent yet irresistible. Against every instinct, he climbed the stairs, candle held aloft. He approached it. The brass lock gleamed in the dim light. His hand hovered, trembling. "Who are you?" he asked once more. The breathing on the other side of the door deepened, slow and steady, like a slumbering giant. The house whispered at the same time, layering voices over one another. "You know us now. You belong to us now." Elias stumbled backward, nearly dropping the candle. Panic clawed at his throat. He could not open the door, and yet he could not leave it alone. Something moved behind him, a shadow in the hallway. Not quite human, not quite a trick of light. It lingered there, watching, waiting. "You'll sleep," the shadow whispered. Not the woman's voice, not his own, but something older, rasping, hungry. Elias's fingers clenched the candle so tightly the wax burned his palms. "I won't!" he shouted. The house's many voices responded at once, gentle and coaxing, like the lullabies of 1,000 forgotten children. "Dream with us, dream with us, dream with us." He sank to the floor, exhausted, trembling. His eyes refused to close, though the weight of sleep pressed harder than iron chains. The woman's voice came again, faint as a ghost. "Not yet. Fight. The house is patient, but it does not forget." Elias's chest heaved. He realized with a cold certainty that he could not leave, not until he faced whatever lay behind that locked door. And somewhere, deep in the walls, a voice whispered in unison with the house, "Soon, you will join us in the dream."
Chapter 10. The Heart of the House. Elias had stopped counting the hours. Time seemed meaningless in the house, measured only by the rhythm of his own breath and the whispers echoing behind every wall. He returned to the locked door for the third time. His hand shook as he pressed against it. The brass lock refused to yield. Behind it, the slow, steady breathing continued, a metronome to his terror. "Who are you?" he demanded again, voice hoarse. A whisper floated through the keyhole. "Your dreams belong to us." Elias stumbled back. The words echoed in the hall, repeated by the house in dozens of overlapping voices. "Your dreams belong to us. Your dreams belong to us." He could feel the pressure building inside him, a tightness around his chest. The house seemed to shift closer, walls narrowing, the floorboards tilting beneath him. "I don't understand," he whispered. "I don't. I won't." The whisper returned, patient, coaxing, like water slowly filling a vessel. "You will understand. The house remembers. The house dreams. And now you dream with it." A shiver ran down Elias's spine. He felt a presence behind him, cold yet solid, like someone had pressed against his back. He spun, candle high. The hallway was empty. Dust motes floated in the moonlight, silver and motionless. He stepped closer to the locked door, compelled by fear and curiosity alike. With a shaking hand, he pressed his ear to the wood. The breathing stopped. A silence followed, so complete it made his own heartbeat sound deafening. Then came the first faint sound of laughter. It was soft, almost musical, yet hollow. Elias froze. The sound seemed to rise from the boards themselves, twisting around the stairwell, pressing against his ears. It repeated, layering over itself in dozens of tones. "Leave," he whispered, though the words felt useless. The house responded, slow, deliberate. "Leave or stay forever." Elias's candle flickered. The flame bent unnaturally toward the door, as if drawn by some unseen force. The air grew thick, charged, making each breath a struggle. He forced his hands to his sides, gripping the candle tightly. "I'll stay," he said out loud. "I'll face it." The locked door trembled. The brass handle rattled. Then slowly, it clicked. Not opened, just clicked, as though acknowledging his choice. A new whisper drifted into the hall, softer than before, intimate and direct. "Welcome. You belong to the dream now." Elias swallowed hard. The house sighed, floorboards groaning like the exhale of some massive creature. Shadows pooled in the corners, moving with a life of their own. The locked door did not open, yet he felt a pressure urging him to step forward, to face whatever waited beyond. He glanced back at the staircase, then at the parlor below. Escape seemed impossible. The house had claimed him, and he could feel it memorizing every detail, the way he breathed, the rhythm of his pulse, the tremble in his hands.
and deep within the walls, somewhere behind the locked door, the steady breathing resumed. Slow, deliberate, patient. Elias's eyelids dropped despite himself. He fought to stay upright, but the lull of the house's presence pressed down, heavy as stone. The woman's voice, gentle but insistent, whispered in his ear, "Do not sleep. Not yet. Watch. Listen. Remember." The candle guttered once, twice, and then the room was plunged into darkness, and the house began to dream.
Chapter 11. The Dream Begins. Darkness swallowed Elias, but it was not empty. Shadows pooled around him, writhing gently as though alive, as though breathing. The candle had died, leaving him alone with the house. Its presence pressed against his skin, whispered through the walls, and breathed in time with him, slower, heavier, drawing him towards sleep. He sat on the floor, knees to his chest, willing his eyes to stay open, but exhaustion gnawed at him, pulling him down despite his protest. The air itself seemed to thicken, every inhalation dragging heavier than the last. Then he felt it. The floor beneath him softened. Not wood, not dust, flesh. A subtle vibration, a heartbeat that was not his own. "You will not wake alone," a voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere. Elias's hands shot to his ears, but it penetrated every sense, threading into his mind. Images flickered behind his eyelids. First, shadows of the family, their faces blurred and pale, twisting, speaking without words. Then the spirals carved into wood, moving like water, coiling, reaching. He staggered backward. "No! I'm awake! I'm awake!" he shouted, but the house did not care. Its breathing grew louder, matching his, yet slower, dragging him down into its rhythm. A figure appeared at the foot of the stairs, faint, translucent, a child perhaps, or a memory of a child. Its eyes were hollow yet endless, staring through him, into him. It smiled. "Sleep," it whispered, and the word was not just heard, it was felt, pressed into his chest, into his bones, vibrating along his spine. Elias's vision blurred. He tried to run, to climb, to flee, but every step echoed in multiple directions at once, as though he had split into dozens of selves, each one trapped, each one walking the same hall in a different time. The walls began to shift, boards stretched upward, ceilings bending, doorways twisting. The house remembered itself, remembered the past inhabitants, remembered every footstep that had ever passed across its floors, and now it was remembering him. "Fight it," the woman's voice whispered from behind, softer, almost tender. "The house is patient, but it will take all who falter." Elias dropped to his knees. Sweat poured down his face. His eyelids closed despite his will, and the house breathed over him, slower now, deeper, matching his heart, his pulse, his very thoughts. "Dream." The words sank into him like water into soil. The shadows swirled faster, shapes emerging from the corners, a man, a woman, a child, and he realized with horror that they were all him, all fragments of his own consciousness, pressed together, mirrored in the house's memory. "Wake!" he screamed into the darkness, but the house only whispered, "You belong to us. You dream with us now." And then finally, he felt himself slip, weightless, falling into the memory of the house itself, into the pulse of its walls, into the endless rhythm of its breathing. Chapter 12. The House's Memory. Elias awoke, or thought he did, in a space that was neither room nor hallway. Shadows stretched endlessly in all directions, yet the floor beneath his feet felt solid, warm, alive. The air pulsed around him, carrying whispers, laughter, and the faintest sobs all at once. He rose slowly, candleless now, for light was unnecessary. Shapes moved in the distance, walls bending, doors opening into hallways that led nowhere, staircases curling back into themselves. He tried to speak, but the words formed in his mind instead. Where am I? The house answered inside him, around him, beneath him. You are inside the memory. You are inside the dream. You are with us. A corridor appeared before him, lined with faint images. The family he had glimpsed before, living moments long past, frozen yet moving. A child dropped a ball. The man laughed. The woman wiped a tear, oh, perfectly preserved. And then, suddenly, their eyes turned toward him, black voids reflecting his own fear. You are not alone, the house whispered through the walls, through the air, through the very floorboards. Every dream you have, every step you take, we remember. Elias stumbled back. Why me? Why now? 1,000 voices answered, layered one atop another. Because you came, because you listened, because you breathed in our halls, because you will not leave. Shapes shifted, coalescing into figures from the past, some human, some not. A man with hollow eyes stretched his hands toward Elias. A child's laughter echoed from nowhere. They were not hostile, not yet, but they were insistent. Elias forced himself to run down the twisting corridor, walls bending around him, whispering every move back in dozens of voices. Run, stop, sleep, watch, remember. He reached a doorway that glowed faintly, and inside he saw the locked room, the heart of the house. Light spilled through the cracks, inviting, seductive, and there, at the center of the glow, he saw a figure, tall, shadowed, breathing slow and deep. Its form pulsed with the rhythm of the house itself. You see now what it has kept, what it has collected, what it has learned. Elias's knees buckled. I can't. The figure extended a hand, not toward him, but toward the walls, the floors, the corridors themselves. And Elias felt, as though through every fiber of his being, the memories of every person who had ever slept, ever dreamed in the house, flooding toward him. They are all here. The woman's voice came close, soft as a breath. Do not sleep, Elias, not yet. The house is patient, but it grows hungry. It will wait, but only for so long. He staggered backward, gasping. Every surface hummed, alive, listening. The house knew him now, every heartbeat, every step, every fear. And in that moment, Elias realized the truth. The house does not need to open doors to trap you. Once it remembers your dreams, once it knows your pulse, you belong to it forever. And yet, he still had a choice. Chapter 13. Confronting the Dream. Elias's legs trembled as he faced the glowing doorway, the heart of the house. Shadows swirled around him like smoke, whispering in countless voices, each repeating fragments of his own thoughts. Sleep, dream, join us. He clenched his fists. No, he said aloud, though the words shook. I won't belong to you. The house's voice answered, omnipresent and patient. You already do. You breathe our air. You walk our halls. You dream our dream. A figure stepped from the glowing doorway, tall, featureless, breathing slow and deep. Its presence pressed on him like a weight, like the house itself, like the floor beneath his feet had come alive. "You must understand," the figure said, voice layered and echoing inside his mind. "The house collects. It remembers. It dreams with those who linger. You came here willingly." I came here to see, not to be trapped." "Trapped?" The house hummed through him. "No, not trapped. Joined, shared, remembered. You will dream with us, or you will wake to nothing." Elias's mind raced. He thought of the locked door, of the family, of the spirals and symbols carved into every wall. The house was patient, but it was waiting for him to falter. I won't sleep," he said again, stronger this time. The figure paused. The air thickened, but the whispering voices grew softer, uncertain. "You resist. You fight. But for how long?" Elias dropped to his knees, hands pressed against his ears, eyes squeezed shut. He focused on one thing, his heartbeat. He would not let it sink with the house. He would not let it control him. The figure stepped closer. Shadows pressed in, tendrils curling around him, whispering, "Sleep. Dream. Join us." But Elias breathed hard and fast. "Not yet. Not yet." A sudden thought struck him. The carvings, the symbols. He had traced them before, watched the house shiver under his touch. Perhaps he could force the house to remember him differently. He rose to his feet, trembling, and pressed his palm to the nearest wall. "I remember myself," he said, voice trembling but firm. "I am not yours. I will not belong." The house pulsed in response, wood vibrating, floors humming. The figure froze, shadows quivered. Then, faintly, one of the voices, the woman's, whispered softly in his ear, "You may slow it, but you cannot stop it entirely. Not forever. Remember yourself, Elias, for as long as you can." The shadows receded slightly. The figure in the doorway lingered, still watching, breathing, patient. The house hummed beneath his feet, alive and vast. But for the first time, Elias felt a spark of control. He had pushed back. He had resisted. And though the house still dreamed, still remembered, still waited, he had not yet joined it. For now.
Chapter 14. The Last Breath of the House. Dawn never came as Elias expected. The house had shifted again overnight. Corridors curling, ceilings bending, rooms twisting like living things. Yet, for the first time, he felt the walls hesitate around him. He moved cautiously to the locked door, the heart of the house. Candle stub long gone, only the memory of flame lighting his mind. The breathing inside had slowed, patient, almost weary, as though the house itself was sensing his resolve. "You resisted," the figure whispered, voice layered and echoing. "Few ever do. Most surrender and join the dream." Elias swallowed hard. I won't. I don't belong to you." The house shuddered beneath him. Floorboards quivered. Dust swirled. The whispering voices surged. Dozens, hundreds, all urging him to falter. "Sleep. Dream. Join us." But he forced his feet forward. Hand trembling, he pressed against the door. The brass lock clicked open without resistance, revealing the room beyond bathed in pale, living light. Inside lay a cradle, empty. A chair, overturned. Symbols, carved deep, spiraled across the floorboards. The air was thick with the memory of countless dreams, and at the center, the figure waited.
silent. Elias stepped fully inside. I remember myself, and I am awake. The figure tilted as if studying him. The house pulsed, a deep, slow thrum, vibrating in walls, floors, and ceilings. The whispers softened. The shadows lifted slightly. You cannot leave, the house admitted finally, though without anger. You are part of our memory now, but you may walk among the waking if you choose. Elias' chest heaved. Then I leave, and I remember what you are. The figure and shadows dissolved. The house exhaled, softly, like a great beast releasing its breath. The oppressive weight lifted. The corridors now seemed vast, but still, the walls no longer pressing in. Elias descended the stairs. Sunlight, real sunlight, broke through the boarded windows. Dust motes shimmered in gold beams. For the first time, he smelled the air outside, fresh and alive. He stepped onto the road at the edge of the woods, heart pounding, yet steady. Behind him, the house stood silent, dormant, patient. It had not abandoned him, it remembered, but he had resisted joining its endless dream. And though he would never forget the breathing, the whispers, the endless patience of the house that listened, he would not return. The road stretched ahead, bright and empty, waiting for him to walk away. Elias turned his back on the house. Its windows stared silently. The shadows within flickered faintly, like slow blinking eyes. The air was still. He walked, and the house waited.
Did you enjoy that short story? I hope you found it spooky. Now, time for another tale. The Waiting Shadows. Chapter 1. The First Footsteps. Mara had never been afraid of silence. She had spent enough nights alone in the apartment to know that creaking floorboards and the hum of the radiator were normal. But this night was different. She was curled under her blanket, staring at the ceiling, when she heard it. A soft, deliberate tap, tap, tap in the hallway outside her bedroom. At first, she froze, straining to convince herself it was just the building settling. Probably the old pipes, she muttered, her voice hoarse from talking to herself. But the footsteps continued, slow and measured, stopping just outside her bedroom door. Her pulse quickened. Mara climbed out of bed, pulling on her slippers. She opened the door slowly, half expecting, hoping that no one would be there. The hallway was empty. "Hello?" she called softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Is anyone there?" Nothing. Only silence. She shook her head and returned to her room, telling herself she was imagining things. She climbed back into bed, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders. But as soon as her head touched the pillow, a whisper drifted across the room. "Don't sleep yet." Mara bolted upright. Her eyes darted around, but she was alone. "Stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm alone. This isn't real." She lay back down, her mind racing. It's just stress, late nights at work, too many horror movies. But the footsteps returned, this time moving closer, brushing past her doorframe. They stopped again, and she heard it clearly. "Watch the walls. Watch the walls." She froze, her hands gripping the blanket. The walls? What does that even mean? Tentatively, she glanced at the corners of her room. The wallpaper, floral and pale, seemed normal.
But as her eyes adjusted, the shadows deepened, curling at the edges like smoke. And then she saw it. A figure, pale, thin, pressed against the wallpaper. Its head tilted unnaturally, and its eyes were hollow, dark voids. Mara gasped and blinked, and it was gone. Her heart thundering, she wrapped herself in the blanket, trying to rationalize what she had seen. It must have been a trick of the shadows, a reflection, something. But the whisper lingered in her ears, faint but insistent. Not yet. Not yet. For the rest of the night, Mara couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the radiator sounded like footsteps creeping closer. And when the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains, she noticed something new. A thin scratch along the wall, right where the figure had been. Mara's fingers trembled as she touched it. Impossible. She didn't remember it being there before. But she knew the truth. She wasn't alone.
Chapter 2. Scratches in the Dark. Mara didn't sleep that day. She tried, truly, but the scratch on the wall refused to leave her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined those hollow eyes staring back at her. She paced the apartment, dragging her fingers over every corner, checking every shadow. Nothing moved. Nothing, except the scratching. She tried to laugh it off when her friend Lena called in the afternoon. "I'm fine," Mara said, her voice tight. "Just tired." "You sound exhausted. You need a break. Come over tonight. We'll watch movies. Just relax." "I can't," Mara said quickly, almost snapping. She hated lying, but she couldn't explain. They wouldn't believe me. "Maybe another time." After the call, she sank onto the couch, staring at the wall with the scratch. It was faint in the daylight, almost invisible, but she knew it had appeared overnight. "It's marking me," she thought, "tracking me." That evening, Mara tried to stay busy, cooking dinner, folding laundry, watching old sitcoms, but the silence of the apartment pressed in around her. She kept glancing at the corners of the room, expecting the shadow to reappear. Then she heard it. A soft knock on her bedroom door, not loud enough to be alarming, but deliberate. She froze, clutching a pair of scissors from the kitchen table. "Who's there?" she called, her voice shaking. Nothing, just silence. Then the whisper, unmistakable. "Don't sleep yet. Look." Her heart pounding, Mara stepped toward the bedroom door. The hallway was empty. She crept along the carpet, listening. The knock came again, soft but insistent, then stopped. And she noticed something she hadn't before. Faint smudges along the edge of the wall, like someone had been brushing their fingers across it. She reached out, trembling, and touched the marks. The cold ran through her fingertips like ice. And then she heard the whisper again, this time right behind her ear. "Closer." Mara spun around. Empty hallway. She backed into her bedroom, slamming the door shut. She pressed her back against it, breathing heavily. Her eyes darted to the corners of the room. Shadows shifted. She could feel them watching. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, she couldn't tell. Then, just as she began to relax, a new sound joined the whispers. Faint scratching, like nails over wood coming from the floor beneath her bed. "No, no, no, no," she whispered. She leaned forward, peering under the bed. Nothing, just dust and a single abandoned sock. But when she pulled back, she caught a flicker at the corner of her eye. The wallpaper moved. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. The pale figure pressed itself against the pattern, tilting its head unnaturally, its hollow eyes locked onto hers. Mara screamed, stumbling backward into the dresser. The figure vanished, leaving only another thin scratch on the wall where it had been. She sank to the floor, shaking. The whisper came one last time before the night ended, faint but clear. "We are patient." Mara wrapped herself in blankets, too terrified to sleep, too exhausted to move. She knew it was only the beginning. Whatever this was, it had marked her, and it wasn't going anywhere.
Chapter 3. The Watching Shadows. The next morning, Mara woke to sunlight spilling through her curtains, yet the apartment felt heavier than ever. Shadows clung to the corners like thick smoke. She rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the lingering sense of being watched, but the scratches on the walls, faint now in daylight, seemed to gleam as if alive. She went about her morning routine mechanically, trying to ignore the unease crawling up her spine. But even while brushing her teeth, she felt it, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, like someone's eyes were boring through her. Mara spun around. Nothing, only the reflection of her own pale face in the mirror. The whisper came almost immediately. "Look closer." Her heart leapt. She leaned toward the mirror, trying to catch a glimpse of the figure. The reflection remained empty, but her breath fogged the glass, and something moved beneath the fog, a shadow that didn't belong to her. She blinked, and it was gone. Mara decided she needed help. She called Lena again, this time ready to admit something. "Lena, something's happening," she said, her voice tight, trembling. I don't know, there's something in my apartment." There was a long pause. "What do you mean?" Lena asked cautiously. It's like shadows moving. I see things, and there are scratches on my walls, and..." Mara's voice broke. "It whispers to me at night. I can't sleep." Lena's silence was heavy. "Mara, maybe you're just stressed. I mean, you've been working a lot, and..." "No!" Mara shouted, cutting her off. "This is real. I'm not imagining it." Okay, Lena said softly. "Just try to stay calm. Maybe I can come over tonight. We can figure this out together." Mara hung up, not fully reassured. Calm? How could she be calm when something unseen was always watching? The evening came, long and slow. Every creak of the floorboards sent her heart racing. She kept checking every corner, every shadow, every dark pattern on the wallpaper. She even placed a chair in front of the bedroom door, a flimsy barricade against whatever waited on the other side. But barricades couldn't stop whispers. Closer, closer. It was patient, teasing, moving just beyond her sight. Mara's hands shook as she grabbed a notebook and a pen, deciding to record every event. Maybe writing it down would make it less real, or at least give her control. Footsteps at midnight. Stopped outside my bedroom. Whisper, "Don't sleep yet." Scratch appeared near corner of room. Shadow figure visible. Pale, hollow eyes. She paused, shivering. Writing made it tangible, and that was terrifying. Hours passed. She tried staying awake, forcing herself to read old books and scrolling aimlessly on her phone. But the apartment's darkness grew thick and suffocating, a living presence pressing against her skin. Then she saw movement in the corner of her eye, a flicker, pale against the wall. She froze. The figure pressed itself against the wallpaper again, tilting its head, its hollow eyes staring straight at her. Mara screamed, throwing her notebook across the room. The figure vanished, but the whisper returned. soft and mocking, always watching. She sank into the chair, trembling, too exhausted to move, and in that exhaustion, sleep found her. That night, she dreamed of endless hallways, of walls that breathe and whisper, of shadows pressing close, of hollow eyes staring from every corner. When she woke, she found new scratches along her walls, deeper and darker than before. The figure was no longer just in her room. It had spread, marking her entire apartment. And Mara realized, with cold certainty, that she wasn't merely being watched. She was being claimed. Chapter 4. Shadows in the History. The next morning, Mara felt hollow, her body heavy from exhaustion, her mind spinning from restless dreams. She hadn't slept properly in days, and every shadow in the apartment seemed to crawl closer the moment she blinked. Determined to understand what was happening, she decided to investigate the history of the building. Perhaps there was something in the past that explained the scratches, the whispers, the hollow-eyed figure. Mara bundled herself into a jacket and headed to the local library. The building was old, a brick-and-mortar relic surrounded by newer apartments, its wooden floors creaking with every step. She approached the clerk, a tired woman with glasses perched on her nose. "Excuse me," Mara said cautiously. "I'm researching the history of 42 Pine Street. Do you have any records, old tenant lists, incidents, anything unusual?" The clerk raised an eyebrow. 42 Pine? That building's been around a long time. Some records, yes. There were a few reports, fires, accidents, and a few unsolved disappearances, actually. Mara's heart thumped. Disappearances? Yes. Nothing recent, mostly decades ago. But some tenants vanished mysteriously. No trace, just gone. The clerk frowned. Old rumors mostly. People talked about strange noises, shadows moving in the walls, whispers at night. Mara felt her stomach drop. Whispers, shadows. She asked to see the records. Hours passed as she pored over yellowed newspaper clippings and tenant logs. One name caught her eye. Eleanor Whitecomb, a tenant from the 1920s. Her apartment had been 3B, the unit directly above Mara's. Reports described Eleanor disappearing overnight, her bedroom untouched except for scratches on the walls. Witnesses claimed to have heard whispers in the hallways. Mara's hands shook as she traced the lines in the old documents. She realized the pattern. Every few decades, someone in the building experienced the same haunting. Shadows, whispers, scratches, and then disappeared. She left the library with a growing sense of dread, clutching the photocopies to her chest. On the walk home, the streets seemed narrower, the shadows deeper, as if the city itself were conspiring to keep her in suspense. Back in her apartment, the sun was setting. Mara tried to convince herself she had been careful, that the building's past didn't mean the figure in her room was real. But as the light faded, she felt it again, the prickling sensation, the awareness of being observed. "Not yet," whispered a voice from the hallway, soft but sharp. Mara froze. She hadn't even noticed the sun had disappeared entirely. She grabbed a flashlight and shone it into the corners of her room, sweeping across the walls. At first, nothing. Then, movement. The figure. Pale, thin, its head tilting inhumanly, pressed against the wall near the ceiling this time, its hollow eyes locked onto hers. Mara stammered, "What do you want?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, the scratches on the wall seemed to move, etching themselves deeper, forming shapes she couldn't recognize. The whispering returned, more insistent. Closer, closer, always. The air turned colder, the shadows stretching unnaturally. Mara backed toward the door, tripping over a chair, her heart hammering. But the figure didn't move, didn't need to. It was everywhere at once, a presence she could feel pressing into her skin. She fled to the living room, phone in hand, ready to call Lena. But when she tried, the screen went black. The whispers swirled around her, a low hum now. We are patient. We always wait. Mara sank to the floor, pressing her back against the wall, feeling the cold seep into her bones. She realized with horror that the building's history wasn't a warning. It was a record, a pattern, and she was now a part of it. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, but inside, the real storm had already begun.
Chapter 5. Blurring Reality. Sleep had become impossible. Mara wandered through her apartment like a ghost, exhausted and hollow-eyed, every shadow now a potential threat. Even during the day, the figure lingered, pressing just beyond the edges of her vision. Every time she turned her head, it vanished, but the whispers followed, insistent, curling around her thoughts like smoke. Closer, always closer. She tried leaving the apartment, convincing herself that the outside world would break the cycle. But the moment she stepped into the hallway, the floorboards creaked in an eerily familiar rhythm, like the footsteps of someone or something following her. "Stop," she whispered under her breath, clutching her coat tightly. But the footsteps didn't stop. At work, she tried to concentrate. Emails, spreadsheets, phone calls, mundane tasks that normally grounded her. But every flicker of light, every shadow in the corner of her office made her flinch. She saw it there sometimes, pressed against the wall or the glass partition, a pale figure, tilting its head unnaturally, hollow eyes boring into her. Her co-workers noticed. "You okay, Mara?" her colleague Jenna asked, frowning. "You look tired. You've been spacing out all morning." "I'm fine," Mara said quickly, forcing a smile. But she wasn't. The figure wasn't just in her apartment. It followed her everywhere. She could feel it lurking in the corners, patient, watching. That night, she returned home to find new scratches etched across the hallways, deeper than ever. Her apartment no longer felt familiar. Every room seemed larger, darker, the corners stretching and twisting in impossible ways. She tried blocking her bedroom door with furniture again, but when she woke in the middle of the night, the chair had been moved. The whisper came from the far side of the room, closer than ever. "We are patient. We wait. We see." Mara's eyes darted around in the dim moonlight. The figure pressed itself against the wall, taller than before, its thin fingers scraping across the wallpaper. Its hollow eyes stared directly into hers. "Why me?" she demanded, her voice trembling. No answer, only the sound of the scratches growing, spreading across walls and floorboards. She could almost hear them writing her name, carving it into the apartment itself. Desperate, she tried leaving again, grabbing her keys and rushing toward the door. But the hallway seemed to stretch, elongate unnaturally, turning familiar turns into endless corridors. The whisper followed her, wrapping around her mind. "You belong here, like the others." She slammed the door behind her, pressing her forehead against the cold wood. Her breathing came in short, shallow bursts. She realized she wasn't just being haunted. Her reality itself was being rewritten, reshaped by something ancient, patient, and malevolent. Mara sank to the floor, clutching her knees. The whisper grew softer, almost gentle, but no less menacing. "Sleep when the time comes." And in the silence that followed, Mara understood the terrifying truth. She wasn't just being watched, she was being prepared. The figure wasn't just in her apartment, it was in her mind. Chapter 6. Confronting the Silence. The following morning, Mara awoke to a room that felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves had pressed in during the night. She rubbed her eyes, but the lingering sense of being watched refused to fade. The scratches on the walls had multiplied, forming patterns she couldn't decipher.
lines that curved like veins, letters that almost spelled something she couldn't read. She paced the room, restless, and muttered to herself, "I can't just sit here. I have to do something." Her first thought was research. She needed more than old records and library archives. Maybe there was a book, a ritual, an account of someone who had survived this presence. Her fingers shook as she scoured the internet, forums, and occult archives. Every mention of similar phenomena ended in the same way: disappearance, madness, or worse. By late afternoon, desperation had overtaken caution. Mara decided she had to confront it. She gathered salt, candles, and mirrors, anything she could use to feel in control, and lit the apartment with dim, trembling lights. "All right," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the radiator. "If you're here, show yourself. I'm not hiding anymore." For a long moment, nothing happened. The apartment seemed to exhale, the shadows stretching toward her. Then, a soft scratching, low and deliberate, moving across the walls and ceiling. Mara's breath caught. The figure appeared, pressed against the wallpaper near the doorway. Pale, thin, its hollow eyes locking onto hers. It tilted its head, slowly, almost in mockery. "Why are you here?" Mara demanded, holding a candle toward it. The flame flickered, casting long, quivering shadows. The whisper returned, distant but unmistakable. "We wait. We always wait, until the chosen opens their eyes." Mara swallowed hard. "Chosen? What do you mean?" No answer, only movement. The scratches on the walls seemed to shift, forming shapes and symbols that writhed in the candlelight. She realized with a shiver that the apartment itself was responding to the presence. Walls, floorboards, even the air seemed alive, reshaping itself to communicate. She remembered the mirrors and placed one carefully on the floor, angled toward the doorway. The figure approached, slowly, deliberately. When it saw the mirror, it recoiled for a fraction of a second, but only briefly. It tilted its head again, as if amused, then pressed forward. Mara's heart raced. The whispering grew louder, now surrounding her from every corner. Closer, closer, always. She backed away, tripping over the chair she had moved earlier. The candle toppled, flames licking the floorboards. Panic surged. She grabbed the mirror and held it like a shield. The figure reached toward her, but instead of hands, thin shadows extended, sliding along the floor, across the walls, curling around her ankles. Mara screamed, backing into the far corner of the room. "No, I'm not yours." The shadows recoiled slightly at her words. The whispers softened, almost curious. "You fight, yet you cannot escape." And then, as quickly as it had begun, the figure vanished, leaving the apartment silent. The scratches remained, deeper now, almost etched into the walls. Prepare, the time comes. Mara sank to the floor, shaking and exhausted. She knew that this confrontation had changed nothing. The figure had tested her, taunted her, and left its mark. It was patient. And Mara realized with cold clarity that she had only begun to understand the rules of its presence. Chapter 7. Dreams of the Shadows. That night, Mara lay on her bed, the apartment eerily quiet except for the soft hum of the radiator. She was too exhausted to sleep, yet too afraid to stay awake. Every creak, every distant sound made her flinch, anticipating the figure's return. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her. She drifted into sleep, but it was not the peaceful kind. The moment her eyes closed, she found herself in a hallway she had never seen before. Long, narrow, impossibly deep, stretching into darkness. The walls were covered in the same pale floral wallpaper from her apartment, but twisted, curling, as if alive. At the end of the hallway, a faint light flickered. Mara walked toward it, her bare feet silent on the floorboards. The whispers returned, louder and clearer than ever. Closer, closer, always closer. She tried to run, but the hallway elongated, pulling her steps farther from the light. Shadows crawled along the walls, thin and twisting, forming shapes she could almost recognize. Figures pressed against the wallpaper, tilting their heads, hollow eyes staring into hers. "Stop!" she screamed, but no sound left her lips. The whispers intensified. "You cannot escape. You are ours. The chosen sees." Ahead, she saw the figure again. Pale, thin, its head tilted unnaturally. Its hollow eyes seemed deeper in this dream space, sucking the dim light around them. Mara reached for it, but the shadows in the hallway reached back, wrapping around her ankles, dragging her toward the walls. She awoke with a start, heart racing, body drenched in sweat. The apartment was silent, or so it seemed. But the moment she looked around, she noticed something impossible. New scratches on the bedroom walls, shapes that mirrored the twisted wallpaper from her dream. The figure had been in her apartment while she slept. Terrified, she grabbed her phone to call Lena, but the battery was dead. The blinds were drawn, though she hadn't touched them. And in the corner of the room, the shadow lingered, almost imperceptible. She could feel its gaze, patient, waiting. Mara realized the figure was no longer confined to corners or walls. It could seep into her dreams, manipulate her perception, and leave physical traces behind. The line between waking and sleeping was gone. Days passed, or maybe nights, she couldn't tell. Each time she closed her eyes, the figure returned in new forms, pressed against the ceiling, crawling along the floor, stretching impossibly thin across the walls. Whispers followed her everywhere, growing more insistent, more coherent. "Prepare. You will see. The time comes." Mara began documenting everything in a notebook, desperate for control. Every scratch, every movement, every whisper. Patterns emerged, symbols repeating themselves. She traced them obsessively, hoping to understand the figure's purpose, to find a way to protect herself. But the more she wrote, the more she realized the figure was teaching her, guiding her, shaping her. Its patience was infinite, its intelligence terrifying. Mara had been marked. She wasn't merely haunted, she was being prepared. And in her dreams, the hallway stretched farther, darker, whispering her name. "Soon, soon, we are patient." Mara shivered beneath the covers. Sleep had become a trap, and the shadows were patient teachers.
Chapter 8. Signs and Symbols. The exhaustion had started to eat at Mara's mind. Every waking moment was heavy with dread, every shadow a threat. She had tried ignoring the scratches, barricading doors, and even confronting the figure directly, but nothing had worked. The presence had grown stronger, more insistent, and now it invaded her dreams. If she had any hope of survival, she knew she needed knowledge, old, hidden knowledge. That night, she returned to the library, retracing her steps to the archives. The clerk eyed her warily as she requested texts on local occult practices, warding rituals, and ancient protective symbols. "There's not much here," the clerk said cautiously, gesturing to a shelf of old leather-bound books. "Most of this is folklore, superstition. People have always tried to ward off spirits and shadows, but, well, it's not exactly proven." Mara didn't care about proof. She needed answers. Hours passed as she pored over texts filled with strange symbols, protective circles, and incantations meant to bind restless spirits. One book, older than any she had seen, caught her attention. Its pages were brittle, its ink faded, but one line leapt out at her. "The patient shadows seek the chosen. Only by recognizing their marks and confronting the pattern can one survive the waiting."
Her pulse quickened. Marks, patterns, the scratches on her walls. She pulled out her notebook and compared her own recordings. The symbols etched by the figure seemed to correspond to something, an order, a code, a path. She realized she needed to map the scratches, the shapes, and the whispers. Perhaps understanding the pattern would give her leverage. That night, she returned to her apartment, armed with chalk, candles, and mirrors. She traced every scratch she had documented, arranging them in circles and lines along the walls and floor. The whispering began almost immediately, soft at first. Watching, learning, always. The temperature dropped, her breath misting in the candlelight. Shadows moved independently of their sources, twisting along the walls. The figure appeared, pressed against the ceiling this time, tilting its head. Hollow eyes glimmered in the dim light, watching every movement. "Show me," Mara whispered, clutching her notebook. "Show me what you want. I'm not afraid." The shadows recoiled slightly, then surged forward, pressing across the floor like liquid darkness. The scratches along the walls seemed to writhe and shift, forming symbols she hadn't noticed before. Triangles within circles, lines connecting points, almost like a map or a warning. The whisper intensified, surrounding her. "Prepare, follow, see the path. The chosen opens eyes." Mara shivered, tracing the symbols with trembling hands. She began to sense the pattern, the order behind the chaos. The figure wasn't random. It was patient, intelligent, shaping her understanding, teaching her the rules of its presence. Hours passed in tense silence. The figure pressed closer, testing her resolve, its whispers flowing through her mind. Mara realized something horrifying. She wasn't learning these patterns by accident. She was being guided. The figure wanted her to see, to understand, and soon, to act. By the time dawn crept through the curtains, Mara's fingers were raw, the chalk dust covering her hands. She stepped back and examined her work. The symbols traced across walls, floor, and ceiling. And for the first time, she felt a sliver of control. Small, fragile, but real. The figure watched from the corner, patient, silent, as if acknowledging her progress. But the whisper lingered, echoing softly through the apartment. Soon, very soon, the waiting ends. Mara realized the shadows weren't just tormenting her, they were preparing her. Chapter 9. The First Ritual. Mara spent the next day preparing. She cleaned her apartment meticulously, arranging candles at the corners of each room and drawing the protective circles she had traced from her notes. Salt lined the edges of the floors, mirrors angled to reflect every corner. The scratches along the walls, which had once been chaotic, now formed a pattern she could follow. A map, a ritual, a defense. Her hands trembled as she lit the first candle. Shadows in the corners shifted almost immediately, drawn toward the light and symbols. The whispering began, soft but insistent. "Closer. You think you know. You will learn." Mara whispered in return, almost defiantly. "I am not yours. I am not afraid." The shadows recoiled slightly, but the figure appeared nonetheless, pressing against the wall near the ceiling. Its hollow eyes glimmered with an unnatural light, tilting its head in curiosity. Taking a deep breath, Mara began the ritual, reciting the words she had copied from the ancient text, tracing her fingers along the symbols in a precise sequence. The apartment seemed to breathe around her, the air thickening, the temperature dropping, the shadows pulsing. The whisper grew louder, wrapping around her mind. "You cannot stop what is patient. You cannot escape what is chosen." Mara pressed on, her voice shaking but determined. The symbols began to glow faintly, a soft golden light emanating from the chalk on the walls and floor. The figure writhed in the corners, as if resisting the ritual, but it did not flee. Then the shadows surged, filling the room like liquid darkness, pressing toward her. Mara held her ground, tracing the final symbols. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of voices overlapping. Closer, closer, see, follow. Suddenly, the figure lunged from the wall, its elongated limbs stretching unnaturally. Mara stumbled back, dropping the chalk. But as the shadow reached her, it collided with the protective circle and recoiled violently, letting out a soundless screech that vibrated through the apartment. For a moment, everything froze. The shadows shivered and recoiled, the whispers stilled, and the figure hovered at the edges of the circle, its hollow eyes fixed on her. Mara's chest heaved, sweat and adrenaline mingling as she realized the ritual had worked, at least partially. But the figure did not vanish. It lingered, watching, patient, its hollow gaze promising that this confrontation was only the beginning. The whispers returned, softer now, almost contemplative. You learn, you fight. Soon you will understand. The chosen sees. Mara sank to the floor, exhausted and trembling. She had made progress, gained a measure of control, but the presence was still there, still patient, still waiting. And she understood with a cold certainty that this battle was not just for her apartment or her safety or even her mind. It was for her very soul. Chapter 10. Reality Unraveling. The night after her first successful ritual, Mara felt a fragile sense of victory, but it was quickly replaced by unease. The apartment seemed different, not safer. The shadows lingered longer, their edges sharper, curling in ways they hadn't before. The scratches on the walls were deeper now, forming new patterns she hadn't traced or seen before. Even the familiar objects in her apartment seemed wrong. The coffee mug on the counter was slightly taller than it had been yesterday. The floorboards creaked in ways that didn't match the weight of her steps. Mara blinked and swore she saw the hallway stretch farther than it should, the end vanishing into darkness. She shook her head. I'm tired. I'm imagining it. But the whispers returned as soon as she sat down. Softer at first, almost teasing. Closer, always closer. The chosen sees. Mara's pulse quickened. She grabbed her notebook and chalk, frantically mapping the new scratches, trying to discern the pattern. But the more she studied them, the less sense they made. Lines curved into impossible shapes, triangles nested in circles, spirals that seemed to move when she looked away. Then she saw it, the figure again, pressed against the ceiling near the corner, taller and thinner than ever, tilting its head as if amused. Its hollow eyes glimmered with intelligence. Mara felt its gaze penetrate her skull, unraveling her thoughts, testing her resolve. You're not real, she whispered, gripping her chalk. The shadows pulsed violently, coiling around the edges of the room, and the whispering intensified, now overlapping voices. You cannot deny. You are chosen. You belong. Mara's chalk slipped from her hand as the room seemed to tilt, walls bending, ceiling stretching impossibly high. Objects she had placed for the ritual shifted, chairs leaning at impossible angles, mirrors reflecting not her room, but infinite hallways lined with shadowed figures, all staring with hollow eyes. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. She realized the figure wasn't just in the apartment, it was in her mind, her perception, reshaping reality itself. Every line, every shadow, every flicker of light became a tool of its manipulation. Desperate, Mara tried to speak the protective incantation again, tracing the symbols on the floor with trembling hands. The golden light glowed faintly, pushing the shadows back, but only slightly. The figure hissed silently, pressing against the walls, ceiling, and floor simultaneously, as if it had become one with the apartment. Mara fell to her knees, overwhelmed. She understood now that she had gained a measure of control, but the figure's patience was infinite. Every minor victory only fueled its presence, shaping her, testing her, guiding her towards something she could not yet comprehend. The whispers softened, almost gentle. "We are patient. The chosen sees. Soon all will unfold." Mara sank into the chalk-dusted floor, trembling. She had survived the night, but reality had been warped around her. Sleep, waking, even thought itself had become dangerous. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that the waiting, her waiting, was only beginning. Chapter 11. The Walls Speak. The following morning, Mara awoke to a silence that felt wrong, too complete, too heavy. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, but even the light seemed muted, as though it were passing through a filter of shadow. The scratches on her walls had multiplied overnight, curling in patterns she hadn't traced. Some of the lines seemed to form letters or words, but every time she tried to read them, they blurred before her eyes. Mara shivered, wrapping herself in a blanket, trying to convince herself she could still fight. Today, she decided, she would take aggressive action. She would push back. She would reclaim her apartment. She set up the candles, mirrors, and chalk circles again, but this time she added more. Symbols on every wall, every corner, even around the windows. Salt lines were doubled, forming intricate labyrinths across the floor. She lit each candle, murmuring the protective incantation she had memorized, tracing the symbols carefully with her hands. For hours she worked, sweating and trembling. The apartment seemed to respond. The shadows hesitated at the edges, the air thick but pliable. She whispered to herself, "I am not yours. You will not control me." The figure appeared eventually, emerging from a corner near the ceiling. Pale, elongated, its hollow eyes gleaming with unnatural intelligence. Its head tilted slowly, mockingly. Mara felt a cold, penetrating awareness, as if it could see every thought, every fear, every hidden doubt. "You cannot win," the whisper said, now multiple voices overlapping, coming from every direction. "You belong, as all chosen do. The waiting is infinite." Mara's pulse raced. She pressed forward with the ritual, following the patterns, reciting the incantations, tracing the symbols faster. The figure moved closer, its shadows sliding along the walls like liquid, stretching toward her feet, then recoiling when they met the chalk boundaries. Hours passed. Time seemed meaningless. The shadows grew more restless, twisting and writhing as if in agony. Mara's voice grew hoarse, but she continued, her hands raw from chalk dust, her body trembling from exhaustion. Then something changed. The scratches on the walls began to glow faintly, lines twisting into symbols she had never seen before. The whispers paused, and for the first time, the apartment seemed still, suspended, holding its breath. The figure hovered near the ceiling, motionless, its hollow eyes watching. Mara felt a spark of hope. Perhaps, she thought, she could finally force it back. But just as quickly, the whispers returned, soft and patient. "The chosen sees. The waiting ends. Soon." Mara realized the terrifying truth. This battle was not about driving it away. It was about understanding it, following its rules, surviving its tests. Every ritual, every symbol, every act of defiance only deepened the connection between her and the figure. She was being prepared for something she did not yet comprehend. Her hands shook as she sank to the floor, leaning against the chalked circle. Exhaustion claimed her, but sleep refused. Outside, the sun had set, though it felt like hours hadn't passed. Inside, the shadows pulsed softly, waiting, patient, eternal. And Mara knew, with every fiber of her being, that the figure's patience far outlasted hers. Chapter 12. In Every Corner. The next morning, Mara awoke to a world subtly altered. The apartment felt tighter, the air heavier, as though the shadows had seeped into the walls themselves. Even the sunlight seemed muted, filtered through a strange gray haze. Every familiar object, the couch, the table, the mirrors, appeared slightly wrong, tilted or elongated in ways her mind could not fully process. Mara shivered and pulled on a sweater. She realized with a sinking feeling that the figure's influence had grown beyond the boundaries of her apartment. She could feel it in the hallway outside, in the thin cracks beneath her door, in the shadows stretching across the floorboards. She tried leaving, hoping the outside world would restore some semblance of normalcy. But as soon as she stepped into the street, the shadows followed. Not in the literal sense, but in the subtle distortions of her vision. Buildings seemed to lean, streetlights flickered in impossible rhythms, and every passerby's gaze felt unnaturally intent, as though they were watching her more closely than reality should allow. At work, the effect was worse. Computer screens flickered with faint shapes in the corner of her vision. Office walls seemed to pulse slightly when she wasn't looking directly at them. Colleagues whispered behind her, though she couldn't catch the words. Each sound seemed to echo unnaturally, stretching longer than physics would allow. Mara's notebook had become her anchor. She documented everything obsessively, sketching symbols, tracking patterns, tracing lines she didn't fully understand. She compared the symbols to the scratches in her apartment and the shapes she had seen in her dreams. Slowly, an order emerged, a sequence, a path, something that seemed designed to teach her. But the figure was no longer confined to corners or walls. It had begun to invade her perception, bending her reality to its will. Every mirror, every reflective surface, every flicker of light became a tool of its manipulation. Mara could no longer trust her own senses. That night, she returned to her apartment, determined to reinforce the ritual circles and symbols. Candles flickered as she moved, shadows stretching across the walls in impossible angles. The figure appeared at the ceiling, taller and thinner than ever, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "You follow the path," the whisper said, soft and patient. "You learn. You understand. Soon." Mara gritted her teeth. "I will survive this. I will not belong to you." The figure tilted its head, silent but observing. Its shadow stretched across the floor toward her, thin and twisting, testing the boundaries of the chalk circle. Mara felt the air thicken, a pressure in her chest, as though the apartment itself were pressing against her. She realized with a shiver of horror that this was not just a haunting. The figure was teaching her. Every fear, every whisper, every distortion of reality was a lesson. She was being prepared for something she could not yet understand. As she sank to the floor, exhausted, she heard the whisper one last time before the night fully fell. Soon, the chosen sees. The waiting ends. Mara clutched her notebook tightly. She was trapped between waking and sleeping, between reality and shadow, and the figure waited patiently, always patient, in every corner. Chapter 13. The Old Records. Mara spent the next day poring over more historical archives, desperate to understand the figure that had taken over her life. The library was quiet, the scent of old paper and dust heavy in the air. She pulled old building records, newspapers, and personal letters from decades past, searching for any mention of shadows, disappearances, or strange occurrences. Most of the files were mundane, rent payments, maintenance requests, but a pattern began to emerge. Every few decades, a tenant reported whispers, shadows, scratches on the walls, or dreams that felt real enough to leave physical traces. And each of these tenants eventually vanished. One entry made Mara's blood run cold. It described a tenant named Eleanor Whitecomb from the 1920s who had disappeared from apartment 3B, directly above Mara's unit. Her bedroom was found intact, but the walls were covered in scratches and strange symbols similar to the ones Mara had traced herself. Witnesses claimed they had heard whispers in the hallway at night, warning of a presence that waited for the chosen. The phrase chilled Mara. The chosen. Another set of documents described a series of tenants who had survived initial contact with the shadows. They had documented their encounters, leaving journals filled with protective symbols, rituals, and observations. But all notes ended abruptly, often mid-sentence, as if something had interrupted them. Mara realized with growing horror that the building itself seemed alive, feeding off the tenants, selecting a new chosen every few decades. And now it had selected her. She dug further and found letters from one survivor, a man named Thomas Granger from the 1950s. He described a pale figure with hollow eyes, patient and intelligent, pressing against the walls, manipulating dreams, and bending reality. He claimed that survival depended on recognizing patterns, documenting everything, and performing protective rituals. But even then, the shadows would test the mind, pushing the chosen to exhaustion, fear, and despair. Mara's hands trembled as she read. Every detail mirrored her own experiences. The scratches, the whispers, the dreams. It was all the same. And she understood, with chilling clarity, that she was part of a cycle that had repeated for nearly a century. Returning to her apartment that evening, she noticed the shadows had shifted. The scratches on the walls were deeper, forming new complex patterns that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. The figure appeared at the ceiling, taller and thinner than ever, its hollow eyes glowing faintly. "You see the path," the whisper said. "You understand. You are chosen. Soon all will be revealed." Mara sank to the floor, her mind racing. The building, the figure, the patterns, it was all part of a design she was only beginning to comprehend. And she realized, with cold certainty, that understanding was not enough. She would need to act, and soon, before the waiting ended and the figure claimed its due. Chapter 14. Tests of Patience. The night after uncovering the building's dark history, Mara prepared herself for the figure's inevitable return. She arranged her protective circles, chalked intricate symbols across the floors and walls, and lined the windows with salt. Candles flickered in every corner, casting shadows that twisted unnaturally, as if testing her resolve. She whispered the incantation she had memorized, her voice shaky but determined. "I am not yours. I will not belong to you. I am the chosen, and I will survive." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the whispers returned, faint but insistent. "Closer, closer. The chosen sees. We wait." The figure appeared at the ceiling, pale and elongated, its hollow eyes gleaming in the candlelight. Its head tilted unnaturally, and Mara realized it was studying her, testing her patience, her fear, her understanding of the symbols she had drawn. "Show yourself," she demanded, gripping a candle like a weapon. "If you want me, then face me." The shadow surged, sliding along the walls and floor. Mara's protective circles glowed faintly, resisting the figure's intrusion. But it did not retreat. It pressed closer, its whispering growing louder, more insistent. "You follow the path. You learn. You endure. Soon." Hours passed. Mara's body ached, her voice was hoarse, and her hands were raw from tracing the symbols. The figure tested her relentlessly, moving in ways that defied logic, through walls, across ceilings, stretching and bending. Every time she thought she had control, it shifted, probing for weakness. At one point, the figure pressed itself so close that Mara could feel a chill seep into her bones. She screamed, but her words seemed to have no power. The shadows recoiled slightly when they hit the chalk circles, but the figure hovered just beyond them, patient, waiting for her to falter. Through the long night, Mara realized the figure's goal was not destruction. It was teaching, preparing, shaping her understanding. Every whisper, every scratch, every distortion of reality was a lesson, a test of endurance, a measure of her ability to survive. As dawn approached, Mara slumped to the floor, exhausted but resolute. The figure remained at the ceiling, watching silently. The whispers softened. You endure. You see. The chosen understands. Soon, the waiting ends. Mara clutched her notebook, filled with sketches, symbols, and notes from the night. She understood that survival was not about strength or fearlessness. It was patience, observation, and understanding the figure's rules. And she knew that the coming nights would demand more from her than she had ever imagined.
Chapter 15. The Chosen. The apartment was silent when Mara woke that morning, though silence no longer meant safety. Years, or perhaps only days, of exhaustion had blurred the edges of time. She could not tell how long she had fought, traced symbols, endured whispers, and faced the figure's relentless tests. The scratches on the walls had formed a web of knowledge, patterns she now understood instinctively. Mara rose, her body trembling, but her mind clear. The figure had always been patient. It had shaped her, guided her, and tested her endurance. And now, she realized, the waiting had reached its end. The shadows shifted softly in the corners, the figure emerging at the ceiling. Its hollow eyes glimmered, reflecting the chalked symbols that now glowed faintly with a golden light. Mara stood in the center of the largest circle she had drawn, heart steady, hands raised. "You've waited long enough," she whispered, voice calm, firm. "I understand. I see the pattern. I am ready." The figure tilted its head, observing. The whispers swirled around her, overlapping, soft but insistent. The chosen. The waiting ends. You see. You endure. Mara raised her hand and traced the final symbol in the circle, a complex intertwining of lines, triangles, and spirals. The apartment shivered, air thickening, shadows quivering. The figure descended slowly, its form stretching impossibly, then solidifying near the center of the room. "You are the chosen," it whispered, hollow and patient. "You see. You belong." Mara met its gaze, hollow eyes meeting hollow eyes. She did not flinch. Instead, she whispered, "I endure. I see. I belong. Only to myself." The shadows recoiled, then merged back into the figure, forming a single twisting mass that hovered in the air. The whispers softened, then faded entirely. The scratches on the walls stopped growing. The symbols no longer shifted. The apartment exhaled a quiet calm, as though the building itself were holding its breath. Mara sank to the floor, exhausted but alive. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, the apartment felt like her own space again. She touched the walls, tracing the intricate web of symbols she had created, marks that no longer threatened her, but told a story of survival, patience, and understanding. The figure had not left, it could not leave, but it no longer threatened her. Mara had survived its lessons. She had endured his patience, understood its patterns, and emerged on the other side stronger, prepared, and unclaimed. The whispers were gone, replaced by silence that felt safe, permanent. Mara knew the shadows would always linger, waiting for another chosen, another cycle. But she had passed through, and the figure had acknowledged her strength. Mara rose slowly, exhausted but resolved. She stepped through the apartment, her hands brushing against the chalked walls, tracing the patterns one last time.
Outside, the sun rose, light spilling into the city, and she felt it, not fear, not dread, but clarity. She had faced the waiting, she had survived, and she was free.